All right, EntreArchitect community, it's 4 p.m. Eastern, which means it's time for the EntreArchitect Context and Clarity live conversation for Thursday, January 19th, 2023. I almost fumbled that one. It's
Yeah.
2023. Happy New Year, everybody. Welcome back. As you get here, say hi. Let us know that you're here and let us know where here is for you. Where are you joining this conversation from? If we've never met before, my name is Jeff. I'm in Indianapolis, and I come here every weekday afternoon at 4 p.m. Eastern for one reason, so that we can find clarity around the things that matter most to you, the architect. Doesn't matter if you're the employee of a firm or you own your own firm. Maybe you circled a date on the calendar. You said, hey, 2023 is going to be my year, and I'm on the runway to starting my own thing. Or maybe you have owned your own firm for a year or 15 years or 37 years, and you're starting to rethink or reimagine what that firm could or maybe even should be. All of the topics that we cover, one topic every day, they all fall under the broad umbrella of the business of architecture, and they're all the need-to-know topics for the success of entrepreneur architects just like you. So thanks for joining us today. As usual, for these Context and Clarity live conversations, I am joined by Katharine MacPhail. Hi, Katharine.
Hello, Jeff.
Welcome back.
Well, thank
Happy
you.
New Year.
Yeah, I think we were here together last week. It's been a long week.
We were. I think it's 2024 already.
It's hard to believe it's 2023 even still.
It is.
And the fact that 2020 was 23 years ago was like, not 2020.
Don't go there.
2020, 2000, the year 2000 was 23 years ago.
I think we age faster when we have these kinds of conversations, by the way. I'm just saying. That seems rough to me.
Okay, we won't do that anymore.
That's all right. Well, it's great to be back this week. We've got another great guest waiting in the green room. This green room, by the way, this week is stocked with Sour Patch Kids, cases and cases of Sour Patch Kids. So we'll get a review on those here in just a few minutes. But glad that you're all joining us today. I see John Jones. He's the first on the screen today. He is in Westport, Connecticut, right across the street from Starbucks, probably not at the mall, but welcome back, John Jones. First in means that you're the winner of today's John Kinney Memorial Crocheted Bathtub Award, so congrats on that. Glad you're joining us. Scott, welcome back from San Francisco. Finally, blue skies in San Francisco. Congrats. Hope you're drying out now out there in San Francisco. Jessica, welcome back from Los Angeles. She says, hello from a town with too many malls. All right, let's talk about that. And then Mark R. LePage, welcome back, Mark. This is from a town in New Jersey with more malls than I can count. Fun fact, I love malls, he says. All right, welcome back to everybody. And as everybody is coming in, still say hi. Even if you're just playing to listen in or multitask today, that's okay. At least let us know that you're here. You're here for the conversation. And if you're on Facebook right now, that means you're in a closed private Facebook group. If you're commenting away and you go, hey, why are my comments not showing up on the screen? Well, it's because of rules. Facebook has these things they call privacy policy, and that they say that they can't allow your name and your likeness and your comments out of that closed group that you're in right now unless you give Facebook permission to talk to Restream, which is this platform that we use every week. So there is a URL down at the bottom left-hand corner of your screen right now. Open up another browser window and type chat.restream.io/FB, like Facebook. And with just a few clicks, you will solve all of your problems, including the problem of not being able to get your comments up on the screen here. So chat.restream.io/FB, as in Facebook, will solve that communication problem. And by the way, if you say, hey, I've done that before, those permissions expire at some point. I don't know the time frame, but just bear with us and try it again. Couple clicks later, and you too can join us for this conversation today. So welcome, everybody. Glad that you're here. We've got a great guest. I've been listening to her book all week. I know Katharine has as well, and I'm looking forward to this conversation. So, Katharine, unless I missed something, I think we ought to jump into this.
Yeah, I don't think we missed anything this time.
Okay.
I
Well,
mean, you didn't miss anything this time.
it's good to get it right every once in a while. So we'll go ahead and kick it off. Our
Okay.
guest today is a design critic whose work you've read in Architect, Harvard Design Magazine, Metropolis, The Atlantic, New York Magazine, The New Yorker, New York Times, Bloomberg City Lab, The Design Observer, Dezeen, and Curbed. That's a heck of a list, by the way.
It is.
She's also the author of a number of books about architecture and design, including her most recent, Meet Me by the Fountain, An Inside History of the Mall. Alexandra Lange, welcome to Context and Clarity Live.
Hi, thanks for having me.
It's great to have you. How are the Sour Patch Kids?
They are delicious.
Did they rip up your mouth? I find it.
Yeah, they do. If you eat too many, you regret it later when you brush your teeth because it makes your whole mouth very sensitive. But yes, can't stop eating them.
Well, I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you enjoyed the Sour Patch Kids. As I said, I know Katharine and I think others in our community have also been listening to or reading the book. Erica, by the way, the other day said that Meet Me by the Fountain was on her beach reading list this past summer. So she read it, and now she's reading. I don't have the title in front of me, but your book on architectural criticism. Which is one I'm interested in. That's going to be my next one.
Yeah, it's called Writing About Architecture. I was actually just thinking about that book, which is now 12 years old, because I'm teaching a criticism class myself, and someone was like, oh, is there a text that would help your students understand what you're trying to do? And I'm like, well, there is, but I wrote it, and I feel really weird about having asking the students to buy my book. So I have to think about how to get around that.
Yeah, I understand that. Yeah, well, that one is one, and maybe we can touch on a little bit of that today as well. But I'm really intrigued by where architectural criticism has come from, where it is, and where it's headed. So maybe that'll be part of the conversation today. But I want to know, to start the conversation today, what was your childhood shopping mall, and what was it like? What did it mean to you?
The mall that I probably spent the most time at was South Square Mall in Durham, North Carolina, which I think was a pretty classic, like 2-level, 3 department stores, 1 movie theater kind of mall. Like that was the mall where I read books in the back of Walden Books, where I shopped at the Gap, where I went to the movies. It had a full food court on the 2nd story overlooking the fountain. So really like your classic 80s mall.
Yeah.
I mean, what more could you want, really? I think when they have a movie theater in there and a food court, and then all the rest of it's just, I mean, who cares what's there, really?
For a teenager, those are the essential things. It's like the store that suits your personal style at the time. The bookstore where you can sneak and read things that your parents don't want you to have in the house. And the movie theater where you can go out at night with your friends. Oh, and the food court where you can like hang out for a very long time and just drink a Coke.
Right. Yeah. And see people, whoever walking by. Yeah. It's like seeing who you see at the mall.
Yeah, this is true. I mean, so what we do with Context and Clarity over the course of the week is we focus on, okay, what's the theme that we're going to talk about on Thursday? So starting with your book today, and then we craft all of the other conversations of the week around that theme. So we started out talking about our favorite building types, and then asked the question, are there building types, or are there projects that aren't worthy of the big A architecture, and why? And then we talked about the buildings that change the way we live. And then tomorrow we're going to wrap up the week talking about or sharing about the malls of our childhoods. And I think, to me, that's going to be a really interesting conversation, because depending on when you were born and probably where you lived, your intersection, I think, with the shopping mall timeline is going to provide a very different perspective. So I think tomorrow's conversation is going to be really interesting. It's going to be a lot of fun to see where people, kind of met that intersection. But I think you're exactly right. The mall that you just described, I was thinking about this before we went live. It sounds very much like Stratford Square Mall outside of Chicago, which was built a few years after we moved to Chicago, and it served exactly the purposes that you described. I had my first job there as well, and the food court and everything else. So I think that's a pretty common experience in this community.
There's some
So
funny stories there.
I'm almost afraid to read some of these stories, honestly.
Yeah.
Hey, this is going out live, everybody. Don't say anything that'll incriminate you. So just
Yeah,
putting that
it
out there.
seems okay so far.
Okay.
Yeah.
So why, of all the things that you've studied and all the things that you've
Mm.
written about, both in the periodicals and the books that you've written, why did you decide to take up shopping malls for this latest book?
Yeah. Well, number one, I'm a child of the 80s, as I just revealed. And so malls had this really important role in my growing up. And I think for people in general, like experiences that you have as a teenager are very meaningful because it's just a time when you're very, very open to new experience and you're trying to figure yourself out. So I think architectural experiences, among other kinds of cultural experiences that happen to you at that time, like have a big impact. And the second reason is like almost all of the writing that I've done about architecture has been for the popular press, has been journalistic writing. And so one of the things that you have to do if you're doing that kind of writing is speak to people outside the profession. And as you probably well know, lots of people outside the profession think that they are not interested in architecture. So you have to find kinds of architecture that it turns out they secretly are interested in, but they didn't realize it was architecture or they never thought about it as architecture. So my book that I wrote just before this one was called The Design of Childhood, and it was all about how the built world structures childhood. And the most popular chapter in that book was on playgrounds, because playgrounds were this thing that everyone has seen a million of, experienced both as a child and like as a parent, but they never think about them as having a design history. And I feel like it's really the same thing for malls. Like we almost all of us have been to a mall at different times in our lives, been to lots of different malls in different places, but you don't think of them as having a history. You think of every mall as being kind of the same age, same era. But in fact, at this point, malls have been around for 70 years, and actually like a lot of things have happened to malls. So it just seemed to me to be really ripe for, you know, a general interest book about this place that, you know, people should think harder about.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's one of the things I said in one of our conversations the other day. For some reason, I walk over to the coffee shop every morning and get my espresso and walk back. And a lot of times I'm doing research for our upcoming conversations. That might mean listening to a book or podcast or something. And for some reason, I've been listening to your book for about 3 days, there and back. And it struck me how accessible the book was, how accessible the writing and the language was. And I don't know why it struck me at that point. I don't even remember where I was in the writing, but in my experience going to architecture school and practicing for a while and teaching, and there's a lot that's in our ecosystem that's barely accessible to people that have architectural educations, right? I told the story of going to an opening of a building that a star architect designed, and I just stood there listening to this person talk and go, I wonder if he actually believes the words that are coming out of his mouth. But for some reason, I'm listening to this, and this is really intriguing to me, that it's a book about architecture and the history of the malls, of the archetype, I guess. And there's big crossover between another book that we've read in the last few months, The Color of Law.
Yeah.
But you don't have to know anything. You don't have to have a design education. You don't have to be a developer, a contractor, an attorney, a historian, any of that to really get into this book and understand it. And so then I started wondering about architectural criticism and writing about architecture. What got you interested in pursuing writing and researching and all of the things that you do now? What got you hooked on on that rather than maybe design or I mean, there's a million different things you could have done, obviously, but what got you interested in writing about architecture?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you, because like that is definitely like always a goal for me, to be talking about these things that are big and complicated and structure our lives, but in a straightforward manner so that hopefully anyone can get it. And it's just like, this is how it is.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I feel like I was lucky enough to grow up in the 80s, as I said. And during the 80s, kind of the biggest name in architecture criticism was Ada Louise Huxtable.
Mm-hmm.
And my mother worked taught at the College of Design at North Carolina State University. So she knew a lot of architects. So she actually gave me a collection of Ada Louise Huxtable's writing when I was in high school. And Ada Louise Huxtable was writing still at that time, you know, for the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. So I feel like I had this shining example of an architecture critic who was writing for everyone, like for this very broad audience in such a smart and pugnacious way. And she also happened to be a woman, which just was kind of a plus in terms of like imagining someone as kind of this mentor.
Right.
Like, you know, maybe if I'm very lucky when I grow up, I can be like Ada Louise Huxtable. So I feel like I was very fortunate to have that example, because it was just, there's just a way that she wrote that, just has so much like clarity, and it was it was for a reason. Like, it wasn't just to hear herself talk. She was trying to make the city better, and that is definitely something that I always have in my mind. So I mean, it was not like a direct path, but like when I decided to be an architecture critic, I always had her as my model.
Right. This is when Ada Louise Huxtable started writing, or any of the critics from the past, it was obviously a very different time. We didn't have TikTok, and we didn't have Instagram, and all of the different types of media.
I mean, now you can write anything you want and put it up.
Now you can. How has, I'm going to say, legitimate criticism, how has that evolved or changed from the time of Huxtable, through your education and through your work until now? What's it like today versus when she started out, or when she was mid-career?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really interesting question. I mean, first of all, I think, the way that she wrote, which was very direct, not especially long, pieces for the New York Times that were published, like as part of the day-to-day like cultural and city coverage. I think pieces like that could totally still work in today's ecosystem. Like that kind of writing, like, is not that different from the kind of writing that you see happening at most online publications. So like her work could still fit in that ecosystem. However, like the ecosystem itself has changed dramatically. Like journalism is really having a very hard time economically right now, because of the loss of advertising. And so a lot of places have cut their architecture critic positions, or just run so much less like writing about architecture than they used to. So it's harder for people to get practice and come up in the world through the profession, and it's just harder to get paid for it.
Yeah.
And then there are other platforms, especially visual platforms like Instagram and TikTok. And you can start to see in some places, people trying to do criticism on those platforms. I'm thinking there's a teenager who has a whole account devoted to skyscrapers. And I'm actually going to like assign her account in my class on design criticism, because like I want the students to think about, like, is this legitimate criticism? And if whether it is or it's not, like, could TikTok be used for, more legitimate, more elaborate, like more considered architectural criticism? Because I think the answer is probably yes. Like I'm probably too old to be able to do that, to make that work. Like I'm Gen X, like I don't like to look at my face on the screen, but I think someone could. And I feel like if I'm talking about how to do criticism for a new generation, I don't want to say like criticism can only exist as a 1,200 word essay. Like I mean, I like to write those, but I also like to write other things, and it's stupid to kind of limit the form to just the tools of the 1970s.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
true.
that makes a lot of sense to me. Louisa on buildings is the
Yes,
teen on. Yeah.
I have her on my syllabus. I just couldn't remember her name.
I've reached out to her several times
Oh, okay.
about coming on here, but with no response. And I don't know the ins and outs either of having a teenager on your live stream show. So
Did you email her, Jeff? Because Gen Z, they don't email back.
this is true, right? I'm probably not communicating in the native language or native platform.
Yeah.
I've interviewed a lot of teenagers, and a lot of platforms want you to like get official permission from their parents for them to be quoted, which as a parent of a teen, I consider completely reasonable.
Yeah. That doesn't surprise me at all. Is so thinking about the way things have changed, and I think you're right. I think tools like TikTok, and we talk about tools all the time, AI and different things, and my thinking is we have to think of them as tools, but I think you could do some version of criticism on TikTok or other platforms. Is what's the, especially in today's day and age, what's the importance of these sorts of narratives, of criticism, whether it's shopping malls or the new proposal for whatever, downtown. Is criticism as important or more important or less important than it's ever been?
I think it's the same amount important, and it's important for the same reason, which is just kind of like spatial, architectural, visual literacy. Like, we are living in cities together, and people are making decisions about the future of the cities and the built environment all the time. And a lot of people are not educated in how to look at proposals, how to talk about proposals. Just like learning some amount of the language, I think, is a big help towards like making people feel empowered to give feedback, and also to feel like, like the experience you had with the Starchitect, like they're saying it's going to be this way, but I don't think that's good. I don't think that's true. Like to feel like you're correct in like not believing what the experts are saying. I just think that's really important, because like this is the world we're living in, and like the more educated people are commenting, are showing up at meetings, are writing letters to the editor, like the whole thing, the better. One of the things I say in my writing about architecture book is like, yeah, obviously, like we're not like only like 10 or 20 of us are going to be architecture critics at any one time in the United States, but everyone like can and should have something to say about the built environment in their immediate area.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. So when you were contemplating malls and you were researching malls and preparing to write about malls, what surprised you about what you were learning as you were doing your research and as you were doing your work?
Let's see. Well, one thing that surprised me was that even though there was really only like one other like big book about malls that was kind of popular and had been written in the 80s, it's called The Malling of America by William Kowinski. There were actually like a fair number of intellectuals who had previously engaged with malls, that there was kind of a mall literature, but nobody had ever put that together, and they'd been sort of individual pieces. And just to give some examples, Joan Didion in the White Album, which is one of her most famous books of essays, has a great essay called On the Mall, in which it turns out that she is a great appreciator of malls, and she actually had read a mall reference book that I also read for my bibliography. So, she was serious about it. Ray Bradbury, the science fiction author, was in direct communication and friendship with John Jurdy, the designer of the Mall of America, and actually wrote some kind of inspirational pieces for him. Like, I just felt like these are things that people do not know. And it gives malls this whole rich, almost literary background that I just felt had been completely left out of the equation.
Yeah. You mentioned Ray Bradbury, and I was walking and listening, and we got into the first Ray Bradbury reference in the book, and I went, "Wait, what?" And I just had to back it up.
Right. You're like, is she
Did you
talking
say
about
Ray
the same Ray
Bradbury?
Bradbury? Yeah.
Yeah,
I know.
Fahrenheit
It just
451.
adds
Yeah.
this whole other layer to it. I felt like all of the like many hopefully interesting thoughts and revelations I was having, like, oh, these like incredibly smart people have also been here before. And it just made me feel like that this was definitely a project that needed to happen. And then also that there would be all of these kind of like almost like Easter eggs in the book where people are like, wow, I was not expecting that person to turn up in a book on malls.
I think there are some Easter eggs in there. I found it. I don't know if ironic is the right word, but it was Tuesday or Wednesday when we used the what buildings are not worthy of big A architecture,
Yeah.
and several people mentioned that a lot of architects look at malls as not being worthy or whatever, but then to listen to the book, and there's a part in the book where you talk about you're kind of running through several of the malls and their history and their design and the designers, and listing off some of the architects involved. The IMPA comes up a number of times, and I'm like, hey, wait a minute. And then the number of design awards that some of these big national and 10-year awards, and so I thought that was very ironic that at some point a lot of these malls were absolutely considered big A architecture, whatever that means. I don't think we ever decided what that means.
Yeah.
And then to maybe not think about it like that so much anymore. I thought that was quite a twist.
Yeah. No, that is very true. And that was another interesting thing, just kind of charting how for a number of probably the first 20 years of malls, like the best architects in America were dying to do a mall because it was this big city building project, and people, in the city, like in the architectural press, everyone got excited. And then they kind of become ubiquitous. And then there starts to be so many malls built that you get specialist firms building malls. And that kind of splits off from like the highbrow, high-end architectural profession. And that's when you start to get this snobbery, which is, another thing I felt like I was contending with this book, just this snobbery about commercial architecture in general, I think, as being somehow lesser than designing a museum, is the example that comes up the most. And I'm like, well, Cesar Pelli designed malls and also designed one version of MoMA. And in his version of MoMA, the escalators worked a whole lot better than they do at the current, like, higher brow version of MoMA, right? Because like moving people around a space is the same thing, whether it is a mall or a museum. And some architects are good at it and some architects are not.
Right.
I can't remember who it was, but you were describing, who the designer was, but you were talking about the bumps on the outside of the mall. Then when you get into the, you realize it's a dressing room with the outdoor,
it's a
they're outside of the envelope. Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome.
That is the Neiman Marcus store at North Park in Dallas.
Right.
And the bulk of North Park was designed by E.G. Hamilton, who was an architect who'd worked for Yamasaki. The Neiman Marcus was actually designed by Kevin Roach and John Dinkeloo right after Eero Saarinen's death. So it's attributed to Eero Saarinen and Associates, but Eero Saarinen was not alive at the time. So Roach Dinkeloo designed this very, very beautiful department store, with forms in space, white brick, that is still there, still in Neiman Marcus in Dallas.
Well, that was, I was one who came up with that question about buildings being worthy or not worthy of high art. And that was because of my own experience working with a mall project and that in school, and a lot of the other studios going on at the same time, just absolutely thought it was not even worthy to talk about. Like that kind of building typology was just below us. Which I disagreed with. So, but I just want to clear that up for the record that it was my question, but I don't believe there are types that are more or less worthy.
Yeah.
But a lot of other people did.
Yeah. I mean, well, one of the things that I would love for this book to help spur or to be used in some way is more architecture studios about the mall. Because I do think that architecture schools can still be very snobby in the topics for their studios. Like they want everything to be international. They want everything to be, you know, a skyscraper, a museum, like the same old types. But there would be a lot of benefit to having all that student creativity focused on like the many dead malls across America, which I think like a lot of amazing things could happen if we put the effort in. And that I feel like that did happen a little bit with my Design of Childhood book. Like I've been asked to be on juries for studios about schools and playgrounds and even kind of like small family focused housing communities, all who are using readings from my book as one of their core texts. So I'm like, okay, well here's a text that you could use to as a jumping off point.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad that's happening because I think that's an excellent point. I mean, we have millions of square feet of, well, maybe
It is
maybe it goes,
millions.
yeah. I mean, it's a lot of square feet and a lot of need out there for lots of different service types, I suppose is one way to say it. So, yeah, I hope that you serve on more juries that
I would
that
love
address
to.
malls.
Like, I would just love to see. I mean, you know, student work is not always the most practical, but I feel like it's really helpful to just kind of like crack open like some old ideas to like get some like really wild things happening in the mall. Like what like what
100%.
could we do? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's really exciting subject that, as you say, could be investigated by so many people. We were talking about it this morning and things that had happened to people's local malls as they changed over from being a typical mall to, let's say, office. Someone actually had their office in a mall. I think James was one who had his office in a mall, and there are people, they still have the food court, but a bunch of offices in this mall, which I think would be a lot of fun. That would be a fun place to work because it has beautiful daylighting a lot of the time in the middle. And, you know, it's just kind of, I don't know, it just seems a lot nicer than an office park, which is another building typology that I think is going to have need some creativity in the next coming years with our office.
I actually, somebody sent me, because they knew of my interest, a really interesting piece of legislation that is before the New Jersey legislature, which is basically asking for a zoning moratorium for the next 5 years for both malls and office parks, so that different municipalities can think of new things to do with them that are kind of outside the current zoning. And in both cases, I think it's probably so that they can be repurposed for more mixed use rather than like single use, which is of course like how all the suburbs were zoned in the 50s, 60s, 70s. But like that to me is a strong indicator of like pretty forward thinking legislation to say like, okay, like we don't want offices in these separated parks anymore. Like we want offices close to retail and close to housing, and maybe there can be like bike connections to like the older downtown, you know, all of these kind of layered things that could happen, and malls could be part of that narrative.
I think it could be cool to have I won't tell you all my ideas because I have a lot of ideas for malls, but if you had a retirement community as part of a mall, like on the upper floors of this mall, because then, you know, they would have all of their excitement right there. They don't have to leave. They could just go outside and walk, or into the mall and walk around.
They're already
Maybe by the
busing there
fountains.
now to walk.
Right, so it saves on gas from busing. Anyway, stuff like that, mixing up. There's so many possibilities.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, malls were already having trouble before the pandemic. Like all the experts I talked to said that like the pandemic accelerated the demise of some malls, but didn't like fundamentally change what was already happening. But I do think the pandemic has changed the way people think about work and where they want to work. So having potentially more co-working style office space or like small lease office space in suburbs closer to people's homes like makes so much sense. Like they don't want to commute all the way back into the city to the skyscraper, but they don't want to be in their house all the time, or they need something a few times a week for meetings. I mean, just, you know, all of these scenarios, I think malls could be part of the rethinking.
Yep, that's true too. I just joined a co-working space because they have events and things like that. So I can work at my house, but I can also go work there. So yeah, we could have these malls. Unfortunately, they're not quite as cool as a textile school or a mill of some kind that usually get reused for these things.
Right.
But that's okay.
I think we have to,
something.
yes. One of the things that maybe the students could help us with is kind of reconceiving the aesthetics of the mall so they start to seem more cool in the way that in the 1970s, all those former factory buildings that were used for adaptive reuse seem cool. So like, you know, like
Yeah.
what is the plus of the aesthetics or the structure or whatever of the mall?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think it's really fascinating, sort of the cyclical nature of this. You know, in the book, you talk about, basically early in the book, you talk about sort of the genesis of this mall idea and what was going on, and some I guess oftentimes nefarious undertones to it. Which again, we do a book club. We read a book every month, and I think it was November of last year. The Color of Law was our book of the month, and it frankly, it startled me as I started to listen to your book and go, wow, this is straight out of The Color of Law. I mean, it's the exact same thing, and you know, same examples, etc. But I think it's really curious to say, okay, well, we're going to create malls for this reason, and then you know, you fast forward 70 years, like you said, and now we're completely rethinking how these structures will affect the ways that we live and we work and where we do it, and which was one of the reasons to talk about the buildings that changed the way we live. I think was the way we asked the question earlier this week. But what when you were doing your research and looking at these things and you know, finding that, and you perhaps you already knew it before you got into the research, but finding that there are reasons, you know, to provide places for middle class white people to go shop by them, you know, in their own environment, and you know, to really segregate these types of things, or segregate, not these types of things, segregate people in these types of activities. What How do you see that now playing out as this spins all the way back around? Is there any chance that these bring communities, uh, uh, diverse communities, back together, or does it still keep us apart?
Well, I mean, I think, yeah, I was writing this book in 2020. So I was literally writing this book during the Black Lives Matter protests. And like, I already understood, like, you know, kind of the underlying, like, I already knew about the history of redlining, and I kind of understood the underlying whiteness of the suburbs, because that is something I'd actually had to address in the childhood book also. But this book, I realized, like, I really have to like get into this much more deeply, because you know, there were kind of racial stories about the mall at every part of its life, from like its inception as you know, basically a retail place meant to replace downtowns because of white flight. So like women who were in the home no longer needed to go downtown to shop. So they're essentially shopping in these segregated environments. But then it comes up again, and you had Black Lives Matter protests at the Mall of America, or you see that there are these teen curfews at malls. There was a recent story about this, and they are selectively applied to, you know, kind of Black and brown youth. So, you know, all along the way, like, race was a part of the mall story. And I just felt like if you're writing a history book in 2022, like, you have to tell this story, even if people are going to be a little bit shocked that, like, you know, oh, I thought this was like a happy book about how everything's great at the mall. It's like, well, no, that's never quite like that. That's not how history works. But one of the things that has happened, and I addressed this more, I would say, in the last chapter about kind of malls now, is that the demographics of the suburbs have changed. Like, especially like first and second ring suburbs are highly diverse places with much more differentiation of family structures, different races, you know, different parts of the country. There are like many different ethnoburbs. So the malls themselves are now in the middle of communities that don't look anything like those 1950s communities. And one successful way that a number of malls have changed is to directly serve the people, the community that lives around them in terms of race or country of origin. So you have, like, I write about this one Latino mall in Atlanta that was built in 1965 for exactly that kind of like white single family home population, but now it's a much more dense, much more diverse area. And basically, if you go to that mall, you feel like you're in Mexico, and it serves like the kind of booming post-Olympics Mexican population of Atlanta. So yeah, I think there are opportunities like that all across the country. Probably they need to be addressed not by like a national chain like Simon or Brookfield, but by more local ownership that really understands like what people need, like what the economic demographics are of the area, like, what do people want? Like the mall is this structure, as I say, that's like built for flexibility. So if you have somebody who is smart, who is programming it and understands the location, it can be anything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, it's a million, a million and a half square feet, whatever it is, and it's just space.
Right. They're actually very open, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Right.
I think the trickiest part, I mean, it's better, if it's a 2-story mall that has a skylight or an atrium, just because that's nicer. Everyone likes daylight. And I do think the department store spaces are quite tricky because they are so large. But people have successfully addressed that. They have put public libraries in them. They have put climbing walls in them. They've split them up in all sorts of ways. So, these are problems that architects can solve.
Sure. Yeah. Have you watched Stranger Things?
I have actually. When I wrote my book proposal for this book in, I guess it must have been 2019, and I used Stranger Things as kind of proof that people were into the mall again. And the Duffer brothers, who the creators of Stranger Things, actually grew up in North Carolina, in my hometown, but they're about 10 years younger than I am.
Okay.
So they probably also went to South Square Mall.
Sure. Yeah. So now that you've written this book, right, and
Mm-hmm.
it's what did it publish a year ago? Is that right?
Last June, so 6 months
Okay,
ago,
so not
6,
quite
7
a
months
year
ago.
ago.
Yeah.
How has the process of researching it, writing it, and now speaking about it a lot, going to places like Muncie, Indiana, to talk about it, how has that changed the way you view or think about malls?
I mean, it's actually because I wrote it during the pandemic, I didn't get to visit as many malls as I would have liked. Like I had all of these great mall tours planned that I just, it's like I still have the maps saved in my Google Maps. It's sort of sad. Anyway, so I appreciate that, like as part of touring for the book, I've been able to see more malls, and I think hopefully incorporate some of that into, what I talk about, the examples I give. I mean, and I guess I feel relieved that, writing a book during a pandemic and like doing more traveling now has not changed my fundamental understanding. Like I think my predictions and the points that I highlight towards the end of the book in terms of like what could a future for the malls that like have life in them be, like I feel those are correct. Like I feel they are borne out by experience. But it's been really nice to have people come and say, oh, like I read your book and like you didn't talk about my mall, but you talked about this scenario that totally happened in my town. Because I was really worried that people would think, oh, if she doesn't talk about, my mall or my state, like it's not going to be relevant. But the thing about malls is like they are highly replicable. Like they were kind of the same everywhere, for better and for worse. So like you can definitely map these stories onto your own locale. And I feel like people have done that.
Yeah, definitely. I think we're gonna, like I said, our topic for tomorrow is what was your childhood mall like, and so I
Yeah.
think we're gonna I think that's going to be a fun conversation tomorrow to hear the differences. We've got some comments over here about Stranger Things being set fictionally in Indiana.
Right, but it's a Georgia mall. It was filmed in Georgia, like so many things. Oh yeah, there's a comment about that too.
Gwinnett Place.
Oh yeah, I like this comment. Yes, about the Gwinnett Place Mall. You are not alone in wanting it to be reborn as like an 80s concept mall.
Yeah.
And I actually, have you heard of the Stranger Things experience, which is one of these like experiences that you could take your kid to? Anyway, they had the Stranger Things experience in Brooklyn. So I took my kid to it, and it's basically like you get to sort of, I don't know, they have some 3D moments where like the creatures jump out at you and then you end up in a food court, and it's expensive Instagram opportunity, and it's kind of dumb. And it would be so much better if instead there was an actual mall where you could, visit the Gap and the Walden Books and have a makeover and eat in the food court. I think that would be so much more fun. I think people would go for that. The kind of theme park of the mall.
That would be fun.
Are there any? I saw. I was looking at your Instagram earlier, and you had an announcement about, I forget which one it was, but one of the big malls is going to be closing later this year. I think later this spring. Are there any of those, sort of iconic malls that are still healthy and thriving, and you think will be, going into the future?
Oh yeah, I mean, definitely. I write a lot in the book about North Park in Dallas, which is still quite healthy. South Coast Plaza in Costa Mesa, which is just south of LA, is very healthy. I was actually out in LA in November, and I went to Century City Mall, the Americana at Brand, and the Grove, which were all packed. I know a bunch of the malls in New Jersey, kind of classic malls like the mall at Short Hills, are still doing fine. King of Prussia outside of Philadelphia is still doing fine. Like there are many malls that are still doing okay. The numbers are shrinking, but I mean, the big takeaway is those tend to be the higher end malls. Those tend to be the Neiman Marcus, Nordstrom malls as anchors, with Williams Sonoma and designer boutiques. So still, I guess, malls that have a high level of upkeep, and the stores are being really kept up to date and have, I don't know, the stores still have an aura, shall we say, that people want to go to. So they're definitely healthy malls. But there are a lot of dead malls, and there are a lot of malls that are kind of like in between and could go either way. And I think really could use some like sharp curatorial intervention to like turn them so that they like are what the community needs.
Let's see. Mark has a comment here. Let me see if I can bring it up. It says the mixed-use retail mall with shopping, work, and residential is huge here, and where he's in outside of Charlotte, I think, Waxhaw, North Carolina, and throughout the Southeast.
Yeah, I mean, I think, like, as we know, we are in a real like housing crisis in America. So building housing in the mall parking lots is a great idea. Like, the malls don't need that much parking lot. There are generally already utilities on site. Then those people will shop at the mall, and it's like you have like an instant neighborhood. So like, if we think of these malls that need work, that are kind of like open to somewhat radical change, as being like the core of a new neighborhood, I think that is like a really smart way to think about it.
Yeah. That was one of the things that I didn't realize as I was reading in the original concepts of the mall. It wasn't the we talk about in architecture, we talk about zoning a lot. How much parking do we really need? I live in an old neighborhood just east of downtown Indianapolis, and we've got, by zoning code, we've got huge problems, because if you want to open a restaurant or really do anything, you'll never meet the parking count, right, required by zoning. But then we look at shopping malls and go, how much parking do you really need for all of that? And then to read, well, it's not necessarily about the parking. It's as much a buffer as it is a place to store the cars. I would encourage everybody, if you haven't read Alexandra's book yet, you've got to check it out. It's called Meet Me by the Fountain. And I'm really enjoying it, both for the nostalgia and the things that I'm learning about the history. We talked about this in the Color of Law. There are a lot of things that are in Color of Law and other places. It's like, hey, I never learned that in school. I don't know if that's hidden history or just not talked about history or whatever. But there's a great mix of all of this in Meet Me by the Fountain. So you've got to read the book. You got to pick it up wherever you buy books. What was, and I know we're right at the top of the hour, so we'll wrap this up here momentarily. But what was your just very favorite experience in writing this book?
I think it was the day that I spent watching mall wave videos on YouTube. So mall wave, if you don't know, is basically like 80s music that has been manipulated to sound like it's being played in a mall. And typically these are uploaded to YouTube over like a photograph of an 80s mall. And it's like if you were an 80s baby, it makes you feel like you're back at the mall kind of listening to the music. It's this combination of like musical and spatial memory. And it's a really kind of popular thing to do. There are a zillion of these videos on YouTube, and I had read about it, but I hadn't really listened to it. So I'm like, okay, like what is mall wave all about?
Mall
and
wave.
It was just like totally enjoyable. The kind of mall wave song is Toto's Africa. If you remember that song.
Oh, sure, I remember. I can sing it right now, but I won't.
Yeah, exactly. It's like it takes you back if you're my age. But the fascinating thing is that a lot of these mall wave tracks are being created by people who are much younger, who are like, teens and 20s. And so they are creating them out of nostalgia for this mall time that they didn't get to experience. Like they are sad that they didn't get to go to the mall like we went to the mall. So they're creating these kind of artworks as a tribute, but then for me they're just really beautiful and moving. I guess it's hard to explain, but it was just a great day. I was like, wow, I am sitting here just like listening to these songs, and this is for work. Like this is legitimate work.
All right, I'm going to have to check that out. Is it just a? I mean, I guess I'll find out. But it's just a still photograph of them all throughout the whole.
Yeah, it's a still photograph of the mall and the song, but you'll hear they make it kind of like tinny and hollow. So
yeah, well, yeah,
like
I can
it's
imagine.
like bad acoustics, but it's evocative.
All right. So this is everybody's assignment before tomorrow. Okay. We're going to talk about your childhood mall tomorrow, but you've also got to go to YouTube and search Mall Wave and share your favorite Mall Wave video tomorrow in our conversation. So I know what I'm doing the rest of tonight.
Oh no! Look at Rod. Rod just wrote, "It's going to take a lot to take them all away from you." So unfortunately, that's going to be stuck in my head all night.
Oh yeah, somebody's posted a link, and yeah, there is definitely Mall Wave channels on Spotify. So
wow, well, that's very cool.
Wow, we're listening to that at dinner tonight. I'm excited.
Your kids will like it. That's the funny thing. It's all like overlapping now. I
know. My daughter keeps asking me, like, does this outfit look 80s? Like, no, it doesn't.
Looks like it's trying to be 80s. Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah. There's something missing.
Yeah. Well, Alexandra, if someone wants to reach out to you, first of all, they need to go and buy the book. But if they want to reach out to you, contact you, what's the best place to do that? How do they find you? Or do you want people reaching out to you?
They can reach out to me. I'm on Twitter and Instagram at Lange Alexandra, just my name backwards. And so you could message me there, or also through my website, which is alexandralange.net.
Right. let's see. So we're going to put that one. There you go. So handles on Twitter and Instagram, Lang Alexandra, and then which, by the way, I have really enjoyed the curation of your Instagram account.
Thanks.
It's fun
I
to,
have fun with it. I like it.
yeah. It's I'm living vicariously through you now, so that's a lot of fun. So go to Instagram or Twitter, and also check out our website. The information that I've been sharing with you this week about the books that she's written and the where her critique has been published in different periodicals and newspapers, etc. A lot of that information has come from alexandralang.net, which you see on the screen right now as well. So follow Alexandra, and Alexandra, thank you. This has been a lot of fun. It's been fun
Yeah.
listening to the book,
For
and
me too.
this conversation's been fun. So thank you.
Okay, great. Well, thank you both, and thanks to everyone who listened in. Bye.
Yeah, absolutely. And to everybody out there, again, thanks. I say this every week, but I mean it every week. Thank you for this, because what did I say? This is our 92nd, I think, Context and Clarity Live, and our 675th Context and Clarity conversation. If it weren't for you, we would not have this opportunity to talk to Alexandra today. So thank you for this opportunity. We will be back again next week, as you might expect. And our guest next week, as I'm scrolling down the list,
I think it's a monk.
the urban monk, Pandit Dasa, who actually I moderated a panel discussion last night, and he led a session on mindfulness and meditation last night before we got started, and it was fascinating and fantastic. And I'm looking forward to this conversation with Pandit next week. So until then, of course, we'll be at it again tomorrow. So think about your childhood mall and the mall wave music. That's the assignment, and we'll see you tomorrow for that. But until then, please be well, stay safe, keep those around you safe and well. Take a little bit of time to breathe, relax, find some way to rejuvenate, because we do this every day. You've got to pace yourself. Thanks for going on this journey with us, and we'll see you again tomorrow. Thanks, everybody.